All right, it is 3 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. This is our final session in our Transformation Network fall series. And we are so excited to hear from our graduate students today. And so we'd like to welcome, we have Brandon, Ria, Cassidy, and Alex. And we are going to give all of them about 15 minutes to present a little space for questions and answers. And yeah, we're going to get started so they have enough time. And of course, we always encourage ongoing communication and questions. Everyone should be on Slack. So we definitely want to encourage, if we don't have enough time for questions during this session, please reach out on Slack. Let's keep these communications and conversations going. We're really excited to hear what our students are doing. So Alex is going to get us started. And Alex, you should have sharing permissions.
Awesome. Thank you, Leanne. And thank you everybody for coming. I know it's holiday break for many of us, so I appreciate the turnout today. Can everybody see my screen? Perfect. Um, so I am Alex Theophilus. I'm a graduate student at Utah State. I'm in our sociology department, and I'll be talking about the research that we've been doing in the Characterizing Well-Being Charter in the Upper Yakima River Basin in Washington. Um, and this research kind of stems from a couple different things. One of them is the Utah Well-Being Project that my advisor, Courtney Flint, has been working on for the last few years, pulling survey data and working with communities to kind of see what people think contributes to a good life in the place that they live or contributes to a good quality of life. And this is often operationalized at kind of the individual, community, or environmental level. And we began to accumulate some kind of secondary data on communities throughout the Intermountain West before my time at USU, but beginning a couple of years ago. And we kind of came up with the idea to see if on the ground kind of lived experiences line up with those secondary data sources and what people in communities think really matters to their quality of life. So in the Characterizing Well-Being Charter, we have been doing interviews with people for the last several months now. We started back in February of this year in the Yakima River Basin and a few different communities up there. And we are interested in a few different kind of sub areas. So the first of which is just anything that communities think matter or people identify as salient issues in their community. We also are interested in like population growth or demographic change in communities. We're interested in environmental conditions and how environmental conditions or water might be changing over time and how that may influence people's well-being. We are also interested in like rural to urban regional connectivity and kind of interdependencies between rural and urban communities. We're interested in food systems and agriculture and community level food sovereignty. And then just anything else that communities identify as being particularly important to them. So as I mentioned, this research has primarily been focused in the Upper Yakima River Basin. We've been working primarily with 4 different towns, including the city of Yakima, which is the biggest town in this research area, also Roslyn and Cle Elum in Upper Kittitas County, and Ellensburg in Kittitas County as well, which is kind of a smaller but still urban place. It's around 20,000 people. And then Natchez and Tieton are 2 rural communities in Yakima County that we have been working with, but we have not had as much participation from those communities as we've had from the other 4. Um, so as I mentioned, Yakima is the biggest city in our research site. It's just under 100,000 people. Yakima, the city of Yakima and Yakima County generally are also split about 50-50 between the Hispanic population and the white population, while Kittitas County is much more white than Yakima County. Cle Elum and Roslyn, as well as Natchez and Tieton, are all pretty rural places. The city of Ellensburg is actually the home to Central Washington University, which creates kind of an interesting community dynamic because that's the only four-year university in any of the communities that we're working with. And then Cle Elum and Roslyn in Kittitas County, as well as Natchez and Tieton, are all seeing kind of a significant amount of growth for rural places. There are quite a few more people moving to those places, which has contributed to kind of our research interest in population change over time, particularly in rural places. We decided to go with kind of three different interview types. Predominantly focused on what we call key informant interviews, which are with like local leaders in the area. But we've also tried to garner community perspectives from anybody who is interested in our research and found out about it through either social networks or public advertising. And then we've had scoping interviews that we tried to do at the beginning of working with each community to kind of, these were kind of focused on getting kind of community buy-in or ensuring buy-in from local leadership, and also getting a broad overview of what some of the key issues in a community might be. We would also kind of talk about what we thought our research methods might be, what our kind of specific lines of questioning might be, and then also just kind of work our way into some different social networks that we could use to find people for our key informant interviews. Ooh, my slides are jumping around here. And then our key informant interviews, we drew upon kind of a three-sphere model of community leadership. So we tried to talk with folks in government, either like local or state, county, federal, try and get some different levels of government represented in our key informant sample. We also talked with a lot of folks from like nonprofits or non-governmental civic organizations. So these could be like people from food banks, people from the local school system, people from like environmentally focused nonprofits. And then we also tried to talk with people in prominent local businesses, especially given kind of the agricultural bend of Yakima County in particular. It was important to us to talk with people in agriculture, either farmers or people who work on like kind of the distribution end of things. And then we also talked with people in like chambers of commerce and things like that, who kind of fall both in like the non-governmental civic category or the business category. And then we recruited for community interviews, primarily based on guidance from our key informants and the people who participated in our scoping interviews. And we opened this up to anybody who basically considers themselves to be a part of the communities that we were working with. So they could live, work, or study there, or just identify with the community. And we advertised these through like email listservs if key informants were in like city government or were running a nonprofit where they had an email that they emailed newsletter or something like that they were regularly sending out. Flyers also went out in like food bank distributions, and we had key informants who were willing to post them physically in places like grocery stores, libraries, kind of publicly shared spaces around town that they thought people would see them. And then we kind of had people reach out to us for some Zoom interviews or phone interviews that we could conduct remotely while we were in Utah, obviously, and not spending the entire 8 months up in Washington. But then we also tried to make a couple trips up to the area to do in-person community interviews. So we had kind of a varied approach throughout the different communities. In Ellensburg, we had about half and half in-person interviews that we did just before the all hands meeting back in May, actually. And then the rest of those interviews were over Zoom. In Yakima, all of our interviews were over Zoom, as well as in Natchez, and most people found out about them through social media. And then in Cle Elum and Roslyn, we had recruited for months for community interviews and did not have anybody reach out to us to participate virtually. So Emma Epperson and I, my colleague at Utah State, made a trip up there over Labor Day weekend, and we're able to talk to 25 people in the span of 2 days to do community interviews. And Tieton, again, although we recruited for like 5 or 6 months for community interviews, we did not have any participation in Tieton. And we recorded all of these interviews using Otter AI for our English interviews and HappyScribe for our Spanish interviews with participant consent. And then they were transcribed by our research assistants. And right now we are currently in the data analysis process. So we're coding using Atlas TI, just given the sheer number of interviews that we've conducted and the number of different people on our research team. That's the software that we've identified to help us keep everything kind of organized and clear cut moving forward. So we're doing passes for general well-being topics, and then we're also doing passes for our specific topic areas of interest that I mentioned earlier, be it food or population change, rural to urban connectivity, and those things. So some of the early kind of preliminary themes that have emerged regarding general well-being in these communities, in our primary communities, I'll talk through. So in Upper County, which is Roslyn and Cle Elum and Kittitas County, one of the main things that comes up almost at the beginning of every conversation is population growth. These towns have seen quite a bit of population growth, especially from folks who can maybe work remotely or who have a second home and who live in Seattle, given its proximity to like public forest lands and the Cascades and recreational opportunities. And a lot of the longer term residents are particularly passionate about preserving kind of heritage and traditions, and Roslyn and Cle Elum in particular. And as that amenity migration is speeding up, cost of living is going with it, and things like only having one grocery store in the community are kind of contributing some financial stress to longer term residents' lives that is maybe hindering their well-being a little bit. In Ellensburg, as I mentioned, it's the home to Central Washington University, which is the only four-year university in our study area. And given that undergraduate student population, there is a bit of housing stress in Ellensburg, and that's something that comes up pretty frequently. So affordable housing is something that people in the community are identifying as a key need moving forward. And Ellensburg is not necessarily seeing the same level of amenity migration as Upper Kittitas County, but it is still seeing quite a bit, especially kind of sprawl that is beginning to move out into lands that have traditionally been used for agriculture. And many of the newcomers to the area have some kind of different cultural values to people that have lived there for a long time. And that's also been something that's come up on both sides, is something that could maybe be worked on through increasing conversations in the community about what people want to see done for future planning to make sure that both the heritage of the community is respected, but then also that the community grows in a way that allows for there to be affordable housing and access to transportation and things like that. And in Yakima, something that comes up almost at the beginning of every conversation is the importance of agriculture to kind of community identity. People often identify Yakima as being a town that was built on agriculture, even though only about like 10% of the workforce in the city actually works in agriculture, and the workforce in the county, it's a much higher percentage that works in agriculture. People still pick that out as something that's important to community life and important to the local economy, but agriculture is obviously changing over time. Consolidation of ownership and farmers who are kind of becoming more so like farm managers, quote unquote, for private equity groups or outside investment is something that comes up very frequently in conversations about community life and especially community level food sovereignty in Yakima. And then the overdose crisis and the unhoused population are also things that come up quite frequently. There's a fairly large percentage of the population in Yakima that lives below or near the poverty line, and that's often referenced as something that needs to be considered in future community planning to improve well-being outcomes for everybody moving forward. So as we move forward in this research, as I said, we're going to keep plugging away on our data analysis and hopefully finish up coding sometime this winter. And then before we have any final findings, we hope to go up to the communities that we've been working with and present at kind of community workshop style meetings and encourage collaborations between community partners themselves, but also invite community partners to work with us in whatever ways they want to kind of incorporate some of the findings from our research into future strategic plans and things like that. And then we hope to complete, hopefully, several manuscripts on things like food systems, population change, rural to urban connectivity, and environmental change in the future, and facilitate conversations on guided transformations, which I would love to hear feedback or questions from everybody on this call on what that process may look like, because I think that's something that's important to the TN and important to our research team as well. But thank you. My email is posted on this slide if anybody has any comments or questions and wants to reach out to me outside of this meeting. And I'm also available on Slack, as Leanne said, and I will throw it back to Leanne and Brandon, Cassidy, and Ria.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. Good timing. You were right on that 15-minute mark. Good job. Yeah, we definitely feel free to throw any questions that you have in the meeting chat. And then, yeah, we can follow up with any additional information and things. So yeah, thank you so much, Alex. Ria and Cassidy, are you ready to go next?
Sure.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I will share my screen. All right, are you guys seeing our PowerPoint full screen? Cool. All right, so again, my name is Ria. I'm a fourth year PhD student at UNM. I work with Ben Warner. This is my first semester, including the summer on the TN. And then Cassidy, who'll be presenting with me, is a third year PhD student in our department, and I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. As said, we're both from UNM in the geography department. We're in the diverse economies charter. And I've been working with the TN since 2022. And this is my first semester as a funded research fellow with the TN. And we're going to talk about our field work that we did this past summer.
Yeah, so we, over the course of a couple months over the summer, we're looking at disaster response in the wake of the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon wildfires in New Mexico, which happened in the summer of 2022. And so, yeah, we'll discuss a few different things during the presentation, such as like our experience over the summer. We did several qualitative interviews with community members, elected officials, water and emergency managers, and over the course of 3 different visits, which were a couple days each. At the time when we started doing the interviews at the beginning of this past summer, our kind of main question centered on this idea of like how central authorities operate in times following disaster, and kind of, you know, what goes along with that dynamic in rural spaces of northern New Mexico. And so some quick background on the area and what we were doing. In 2022, the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fire, which initially began as 2 separate fires, broke out in northern New Mexico. I have a map that I'll show in a second to kind of help contextualize where this area is, but it's roughly kind of north of Santa Fe, south of Taos to the east, in those mountains. And so both these fires, again, began in early 2022, and they were the result of a prescribed burn that kind of got away from the Forest Service near the Hermit's Peak trailhead in the Santa Fe National Forest. And the fires weren't contained fully until August of 2022, so they burned for quite some time. The fire burned nearly 300,000 acres in Morris, San Miguel, and Taos counties, and the damages are estimated at upwards of $4 billion from FEMA. So it was quite impactful for that part of New Mexico, especially Mora and San Miguel counties, which is what our presentation kind of centers on and what our research is centered on throughout. Oh, here's the fire area. Perfect. And so this is showing kind of like the burn scar area. And so again, kind of to the east of Santa Fe and Taos, and then Mora and San Miguel counties are here in that context. So they border each other, and the city of Las Vegas, which you can see on the map, is kind of the largest city in that area. And so that's kind of where this has been centered. And so kind of a background of why we kind of were doing what we were doing and how that came to be is over the past few decades, the amount of land destroyed by wildfires in the southwestern US particularly has tripled. All the states in the Intermountain West, which is what the TN focuses on, have seen significant fires in the last 15 years. Some of the reasons that this happens is because of early snowmelt, rising temperatures, and land management practices that kind of either contradict each other or don't kind of go with how land has been traditionally managed. And then in northern New Mexico in particular, a huge problem that we've had has been a monsoon season often directly follows wildfire season. So it creates a huge risk of flash flooding, which is a lot of what happened as we found in Mora and San Miguel counties. So again, here's that map. Do you have anything to add on the background, Cass?
No, I
Okay.
think you covered it. I guess actually I'll just add one thing is that something that we look at with the Diverse Economies Charter and why we've decided to look at rural New Mexico in particular is because we are interested in what economies, what functions are happening in communities beyond just financial. And one thing that really came up with this fire is there are many ways that people have been living in generational land-based livelihoods in this area for like in some situations hundreds of years that cannot be monetized in the way traditionally emergency response and is monetized. And so there's this tension of how people have historically lived their lives and how they're living in the moment with this disaster that occurred. And it was like at that place that we were really interested in thinking about these questions of what power dynamics were at work. Thanks, Rhea.
Totally. Thanks. And so to kind of jump off of that, the research setting of where we chose, Mora and San Miguel counties, a lot of the damage happened in these areas. Mora is one of the poorest in New Mexico, and a lot of residents' livelihoods are fully tied to their generational ownership of land. And then Las Vegas, which again was kind of the largest city, which is what this picture is of, served as kind of an impromptu command center for both counties throughout the response period of the fire. And then something I wanted to like point out here was that like we talk a lot about response and firefighting, but both of these counties have a largely volunteer firefighting force. So again, a lot of it is very like community driven.
One thing I'll point out, Rhea, that kind of differentiates Mora and San Miguel County additionally is that, as you can see, the population of Mora County is much smaller than that of San Miguel County. However, there's really strong, as Rhea's mentioned, generational ties of community. So actually a lot of the economy of Mora County is from people that perhaps no longer live in the county. They're working elsewhere in the state or in other places, but they're actively sending money back to their families and to their homes and to their homesteads that are keeping ties to that county. So even though it is one of the poorest counties in the state, especially based on property taxes, etc., there's this really like external economy that's taking place in that place.
For sure. Thanks, Cass. And yeah, so again, what we kind of did throughout this time was we spent a few trips over the course of this past summer talking to people that had been impacted by the fire. And so we kind of began with we did a snowball method where we kind of began with a few contacts that we had gotten either through some of the other professors who are on this charter. One of the main professors on our charter, Manuel Montoya, is actually from Mora. So we got some contacts from him to begin with, and then kind of went from there. We talked to some water managers and emergency managers who, again, should be noted, are largely in Mora County. The emergency manager also holds 4 other roles throughout the county. So there's not really, while there is kind of a structure of response, there's not really people that have dedicated roles that are kind of centered on disaster response. So it is kind of, again, like a really community driven effort. And so our interviews, we were able to kind of, and throughout the field work, we were able to, we took a kind of long drive through the burn scar and we're able to see kind of where the fire broke out. We were able to 1 year later, see some of this green that was coming in under the burn scar that you can see in these pictures. We interviewed a few people who were kind of claims officers at the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon FEMA office, and so got to spend a lot of time in these places. And I think that really helped kind of contextualize this. And so we spent our first trip doing a little bit more of like research setting, getting kind of in tune with what was going on. We talked to a few nonprofits that were doing some good work. And then our following trips did a little bit more of talking to community members and other kind of smaller groups there. One of the most notable, I think for me personally, was when we talked to a group of volunteer firefighters who kind of gave us a really interesting rundown of how firefighting works, kind of between wildland firefighters and structural response firefighters. And so I think we got a lot out of doing kind of these separate trips, because it gave us time to really contextualize like each interview and each set of interviews that we did on each trip.
And I'll just add here, because I had been associated and already working with the Diverse Economies Charter for about a year, I had done a lot of background research as part of supporting the charter and wanting to work in this area of the state. And we also did archival research with the Center for Southwest Studies, where we actually found primary documents of oral histories from the 1970s in and around Las Vegas and the greater San Miguel and Moore counties. And because we were trying to understand if there was a relationship between this generational land ownership and also collective management of natural resources and the irrigation systems up there. So there was a lot of basis of background work that we did before we actually went there. And because we had a shorter period of time for the paper we were working on, we set a goal to interview 13 people. And I just also wanted to highlight that it was a really hard actually to find people to talk to. There's many people right now in New Mexico that are doing research in this area. And in certain places, there's definitely research exhaustion. But however, it really was helpful that we were able to go into spaces and say, we're students, we're doing this for, for research. And we had multiple people say, okay, well, as long as you're not a reporter, I'm happy to talk to you. Able to be like very sincere with us. We were able to have an interview with the emergency manager of San Miguel County as well. And he was able to connect us to many other people, including the fire chief of San Miguel. And it kind of, as Ria said, we used snowball sampling, and that really helped us have entree to be able to get to some of these people that maybe had not yet been exhausted by research.
Totally. And I think kind of to drive Cassidy's point home, a lot of the people that we talked to also very much like viewed themselves as still in an active like recovery space. Like it's still an active disaster at the time. And a lot of people were kind of careful to mention that, like, well, we're not really out of it. Like we're still in it here. So trying to kind of be careful not to tax people too much as we were asking for interviews and information, and kind of being conscious of that. And so then like Cassidy mentioned, we kind of had one paper that had a shorter timeline. And so this next kind of the last part of the presentation, I'll focus on this one paper that Cassidy and I are about to publish soon. And then Cassidy will kind of take the next steps and how her dissertation specifically will kind of help carry this work forward past this particular paper. And so the paper that we're about to send out is called Bridging Disconnects and Disaster Response in the Wake of the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon Wildfires in New Mexico. And the big question that this kind of centers on came from our original question, but centers a lot more on where do disconnects and disaster response between federal and local entities occur. Because in Mora and San Miguel counties, a structure of response does exist, but the bureaucratic disaster response doesn't always mesh with the local response that's happening. And this was seen in a lot of different areas throughout Mora and San Miguel, but one of the local response processes that was most clear was in the management of small drinking water systems. So we do use that as an example a couple times throughout the paper. And so a lot of the conflict, kind of like I mentioned before, around these in the response to the fire comes from this disconnect in governance and this kind of breakdown at the beginning, right when the fire broke out. A lot of tension came from the different levels of firefighting response as the fire spread. and the disaster grew more kind of dire, the tension shifted to this relationship between existing federal policies and what actually happens in a hyper-localized and rural setting of disaster response. And so that was kind of what the paper focuses on. And so our key takeaways from this portion, from the paper, were kind of this idea that in rural spaces, local community organizations are the ones to step up and respond quickly rather than established organizations or even a government system. Any policies that are enacted in like rural spaces should be hyper localized ordinances that incorporate knowledge of local communities and engage with that specific place. And to, carry on from that, in San Miguel and Mora, response was highly specific to each specific place. Understanding the differences and like how response is carried out in this regional context is key to enacting any local change. Unofficial information sharing is common in times of disaster, and it's super important to capture these localized responses when planning for like a broader solution. And then the kind of last piece that or one of the pieces that I wanted to touch on is community resilience is often assessed in disaster management and disaster risk research, and kind of exploring different ways to strengthen that for more robust disaster risk management. And so exploring this concept of community in the context of like what that can mean in a rural space is important. And our lit review kind of focuses on this idea of community of practice and interaction-based community as one of the dominating views that we should take in these kinds of settings. And I'll let Cassidy kind of take away the next steps portion.
Great. So jumping up this, Rhea, you can go to the next slide. One thing that felt particularly impactful for me is that when we looked at the actual land that was burned, a majority of the land was private land, where on county, so on average, about 60% of the land burned was private land, where only 41% federal lands and a less than 1% with New Mexico state land. So for me and my research questions for my dissertation, I'm interested in how mutual aid engages in crisis and how communities come together and support each other. I wanted to know how people were grappling with these major losses associated with the burning of lands, especially with the multi-generational history of land ownership in the area. So I'll be starting my dissertation research in the area in spring. I'll be partnering with a key community organization in the area called Neighbors Helping Neighbors, which is a mutual aid organization that formed directly in response to the wildfires. And I'll be exploring the role of community care in response to this crisis. My question is, what role has place-based mutual aid played in recovery from the 2022 wildfires and subsequent flooding? And our informal economy serving as climate adaptation? Rhea, you can go to the next slide. So this is just a little bit about my methods. I am taking a community engaged research approach. That means that I'm going to be working directly with a community partner to engage with communities, not only in what I find interesting as a researcher, but also by hearing from them about what their needs are. And so it's more of a reciprocal process than some traditional research methods. And the data collection methods I'll be using are focus groups, sketch mapping, and interviews with stakeholders. So those focus groups are going to take the form of listening sessions, which could be thought of as a public forum. And I'll be partnering with Neighbors Helping Neighbors to host these. And these will be where community members can come together and in a storytelling format, share both with each other, as well as researchers that are present about their experiences, both of the emergency and also the active recovery that they're in. These listening sessions will help curate something that I'm calling now a community atlas, which has a sci-art aspect of it. And essentially community members will be able to submit pieces of mappings or art will be included to be a visualized, spatialized representation of what they value in their community and what they have seen as resources through this process of emergency response. And so there's many other layers there. I put a lot of this in the slide because I knew we wouldn't have a lot of time. I think we're just over time, so I think I'll end there. But Rhea and I are excited to continue to be working in the area. And at least for myself, my dissertation research is going to be going on in the area for the next 2 years. So there's a lot more to come than what we were able to present today. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Cassidy and Rio. We really appreciate your time and you sharing this really important research with us. Brandon, do you have slides? Are you going to present on your own? Here we go. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you.
Oh yeah, Shay Brennan William Francis Shinishia, Nut Ortane, Touchin Island or Tutsoni Bashishin, Twitching the Shadow, Kilchin Tashandala, Shilchina A, Topaha, I see Jitli Jean De Nasha, Kutabilash Laishla. Thank you, everybody. I just gave my traditional introduction. I've met everybody here, but there are some new faces. So when a Daenerys person is speaking before people, they like to de develop kinship or start kinship with people who are talking to, and us as Indigenous people, we not only have kinship with each other, but as five-fingered people, but with all things, water, the land, the plant. So that's just one thing I like to acknowledge when I start my presentations and when I'm talking to people, especially other Navajo or Indigenous people. They really appreciate it when you acknowledge all your relatives and acknowledge your not only your grandparents, but your father's parents. And it's because all these clans are tied to place and it's really important. So those of you who haven't heard of my presentation, or it's and my project, it's the feasibility of controlled environment agriculture from the perspective of Indigenous farmers in the Four Corners. And yeah, this project started way back in the fall of 2022, and we're looking for ways of how we could collaborate with the Transformation Network and actually do convergent research, and not only multi-institutional, but multidisciplinary research. And us at the Agricultural Science Center, where I work at with Dr. Kevin Lombard and Emilio McLean, who's also helping with this project. The University of Arizona, Dr. Coletta Chief's team, they were developing farmers' needs assessment. So we collaborated with them to develop this survey and include questions not only from that included controlled environment questions, but also included questions that related to COVID-19, which had a big impact, one of the biggest impacts was on the Navajo Nation, and see what kind of impact it had on farming, as well as working with Emiliano, who has an agrovoltaics project, and including those questions into a very big survey. And those of you who helped know how long this survey is, and it takes like 20 minutes. And so not only was that one of the barriers that we came up with, how do we include all these questions, working on Indigenous sovereign land on the Navajo Nation. There's a lot of data sovereignty and Indigenous sovereignty issues that come into play. So as this survey was in development, like I mentioned, we partnered with the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District to help farmers who haven't been farming get back into farming. And this was part of a cover crop study to get farmers who haven't been farming in the past 5 years, up to a year, see if they could adopt a cover cropping regime into their production methods, as well as seeing if there was any interest in that. And so this project was called the Healthy Soils Pilot Program. And for our part, the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District, they paid for all the seed, even going as far as to come and plow this or till the soil, and then broadcast the seed, the cover crop seed onto their land. And here's just some of the questions I would come in and do. For my part, I would make note of who the landowner was when we contacted them, and I would measure the total acreage using Google Earth, and just ask them basic questions like, what had they grown there previously, and then as well as what kind of crop problems they were having. And if their land was fallow, I would ask them how many years have been fallow. And then I would go on to Soil Web, and I would make a note of the soil type and as well as the soil conditions, and make note of all the irrigation type, just asking them all these questions. So in 2013, over this program, we enlisted 19 farmers to take part in the Healthy Soils project, and as well getting 275 acres back into production. And as well, the only stipulation was they had to incorporate a cover cropping regime into their production system. And when we started in 2022, the only problem that they had, since it was late in the growing season, and a lot of the farmers in the region, they do grow winter storage crops. So trying to have them adopt the cover cropping method into their current production method in the middle of their production regime was kind of hard. So a lot of them who didn't make it, there was 1 out of 4 farmers in this project actually got a cover crop in, but only one was successful in actually establishing it because of not only the late timing, but the irrigation water in the San Juan River Valley or in San Juan County shuts off about mid-October. And for cover crop to truly get established successfully, you need at least good 2 or 3 soaks on the cover crop to get established. And trying to get people who haven't established cover crop before and have them do it is something that we didn't really take into account. And so of the soil results, we gave what Dr. Lombard likes to say, we gave them the Cadillac of tests. We gave them the even went as far as to pay for the saturated paste, and we paid for to avoid any bias. We sent it to an independent lab, which was Ward Lab, and as you can see, the pH of the soil is very on the alkalinity side, and at all sites in the San Juan River Valley, all 19 sites, the lime was very high. And one of the problems that we ran into, as you can see, the sodium on the saturated paste, which is the saturated paste test actually lets the farmer and the person analyzing the soil know what the soil root interaction will be when the water's when the water is fully saturated. So we paid for the saturated paste, which is a very good test, and it came back like the salinity and it's actually interfering with the uptake of nutrients in the soil. So some of these sites were very high in that, and disseminating this back to the farmers was something we are in the process of doing. And in the future, more convergent research that's being done is we're collaborating with U of A and the Bonkers team to actually add on to our list of how many ways we can analyze the soil for these farmers. And then as we made more progress on the survey, thanks to Dr. Chief's team and Mozalve and all their other people who went to the meetup in Pasco. You all got a chance to help be a part of this editing process, and we're very thankful. We incorporated all of your comments and details into this survey, which eventually became known as the Four Corners Indigenous Farm Assessment. And we decided to upload this to Qualtrics and as to make it accessible, since a lot of the places on the reservation and people living on the reservation, they might not have access to a smartphone or they might not have access to an internet. And so we decided to give these surveys in person and to have it uploaded to an offload to a tablet. So the researchers like Emiliano and me and our interns can actually go out into the field where it doesn't require Wi-Fi or internet service and meet farmers in the rural area and ask them these questions, which are very important. And the only thing is that we did not have any incentives to give the farmers. So every farmer that we've interviewed so far has taken this extensive survey, which takes about depending on your tech savviness, it takes about 10 minutes, but a lot of the farmers that we interview, they like to be read through, and that goes back to show that there's an education barrier as well as a language barrier when working with indigenous people. So when you're thinking about research and going to reservations or rural communities such as this, you have to keep that in mind, that some of these concepts that you're sharing with them are advanced concepts, and explaining that not only in simple terms, but in another language is also another barrier you come across. And here's some of the events that we have have gone to. And each of these communities on the reservation, they're divided into what's called chapters. It's like a local governance. And since the research is being conducted on the Navajo Nation, we did have to go before the Navajo Nation Human Research Review Board and get approval and get IRB approval. And the U of A team helped us expedite that process and allowed us to get one of their resolutions and present it before these chapters. And before we could actually go into these communities and do research, we had to get approval at the chapter level, and making all the community members aware by attending the farm board meetings, which is very important because in the San Juan River Valley, in particular in the Navajo Nation, 75% of the people who farm on the Navajo Nation, they farm along the San Juan River. So all this data we're collecting is very important because a lot of the farmers come from this area. And Dr. Chief's team had approval from the various agencies, but they didn't have the Northern Navajo Agency because the Navajo Nation's divided up into different agencies, and different council delegates oversee different regions. But then we did, with thanks to Wazalbe and Dr. Chief, we're able to get the farm assessment survey approved for dissemination, and we started implementing and doing community outreach at the NMSU Ag Science Center annual field day, and we still went to each of the farm board meetings for each of the respective chapters, and we tabled at the Northern Navajo Nation horticulture exhibit, as you can see in this picture on the left, and that's our intern Corbin helping give out participants take the survey. And since it was an extensive survey, getting people on a listserv so we could come and visit their farm and visit them later was one of the things that helped us get the number of surveys that we got now. And we're looking to survey 114 people, which will be representative of the target population. And we're looking at a maximum of 300. And just this past Saturday, we received Northern Navajo Agency Council, so the number of chapters and communities that we can survey was broadened. And so we've got most of the Navajo reservation that we can accept surveys from. And here's some of the preliminary results, and this is how it looks in Qualtrics. And this is one of the questions, which was research management, how and where research should be conducted and level of involvement. And it was on the Likert scale. So as you can see, they view research conducted as very important, and very few people put not important for some of the questions. And as you can see, some of the questions were conduct research on producer farms all the way down to producer initiated research. So people in this area are looking for research to be done in their region. So this is just one of the preliminary results from one of the questions. And I do believe there's 80 questions on this survey, so it is extensive. And here's a question that might be of interest to Dr. Lombard and Emiliano. It says, do you have any interest in placing renewable energy infrastructure on your property? Well, 15 said no. A majority did say yes. And when asked, have they heard of agrivoltaics, which was one of the questions, the majority of them said no. So there is interest, despite not being aware of the new renewable energy aspects of the. And so we are looking to wrap up data collection in the winter and begin analysis and everything else. So that's just a little bit about the project and working with indigenous people. And thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandon. We really appreciate your time and sharing your research. We have this scheduled until 10 till, but if folks do have some questions and want to stay on, we do have a few minutes. So are there any questions for our presenters today? Great. Well, thank you all so much for attending today. We had a great turnout, and it's always just so nice to hear what the students are working on. We will be sharing the spring series. We do have a convergence research focus for the spring series. And so we'll be sending out flyers for that and giving folks updates around the dates for that. So yeah, be on the lookout for some info about our spring session. And yeah, thank you all so much for coming today. And we really do appreciate all of you and your hard work on the TN. And yeah, we hope you all have a wonderful winter break. And yeah, Mindy, do you want to say any goodbyes?
I just also really want to thank all of our presenters, and I also really impressed with all the research that's happening. Also want to thank all of the faculty advisors that go behind and support these students. And one thing that I think is really great about this work is that it shows the diversity of the type of research that's happening in the TN, but there's also a lot of common threads, I think, to this work. And so I think that one of the things that we want to do, I think, in our future gatherings and also particularly in our annual meeting, is start to think more about the connective threads. And as I think many of you know, we're starting to build some synthesis groups and workshops where we're going to be funding people to be able to get together to really synthesize the research that's happening across the project charter. So if you have ideas for how we could maybe do some of the synthesis across some of this research, come to us with your ideas. We're looking to fund proposals that people might have to do that. And we're also going to be looking to you guys to help us think about how we can pull together work in the annual meeting that's going to be coming up in May to highlight more of the research that's happening and connecting the threads of the research together. So we'll be looking for nominations for proposals for pulling people together to do that kind of work and actually even organize it. So including looking to students to help organize part of the annual meeting as we put things and workshops as we put things together. But just want to thank you all for the tremendous work that all of you do, even if you didn't present today. That we know that every one of you is doing so much. And so have a wonderful, restful break, and we will pick up with even more work. So thanks to Leanne and Rachel for all the work that they did putting this series together. It was a great fall series. We've got more coming up in the spring, and we appreciate you all so much. So have a wonderful break, and we'll see you all again soon.